And welcome everybody to the Creator Spotlight. I am Mark Spencer. I'm here with my good buddy Steve. We are both from Ripple Training, and I will show our little Twitter handles right there. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing great, Mark. Good to
let me get rid of that music there. There we go.
Yeah. So we're you guys that are watching us, we did some rebranding over the past couple of weeks. We had a kind of a new YouTube banner and a new look for our show. And the whole idea with the Creator Spotlight is to bring on content creators, do a kind of a regular series of interviews for noteworthy content creators, just to kind of expand the community and look at what other things people are doing with Final Cut Pro. And we're pretty excited about this series. So I did one a while back with the Final Cut BRAW, and this is our second one with the new rebranding, and we're super excited about today's guest.
Absolutely. And just to give a little bit of background, we're talking about RAW. And if you guys, most people watching this are editors with Final Cut Pro and maybe other platforms as well. And several years ago now, I think it was 2018, Apple came out with ProRes RAW about the same time that Blackmagic came out with BRAW. And you haven't been able to use them across. You can't use ProRes RAW in Resolve, and you can't use BRAW in Final Cut Pro without needing to first process it until now, today. So we are super thrilled to have with us today Chris Hocking, who is the inventor of this plugin, this extension for Final Cut Pro. Let me bring him in right now. And
G'day, everyone.
Hey, welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show. Number 2, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and it's I guess it's very early for you. We're in I'm in California, Steve's in Arizona, and you are in Melbourne, Australia, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's 8 a.m. on a Tuesday.
8 a.m. on a Tuesday, and it's still Monday for us, so you are in the future.
The future is bright.
So can you give us a little bit of background just so we understand, because I know before we get to the BRAW Toolbox, I mean, you've been doing other software-related things related to Final Cut Pro for a little while. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about how you got into this and what else you've done.
Yeah, so I have a very sort of weird and wonderful sort of background. I sort of started off in animatronics. So I used to work for a BBC kids show called The Tweenies. I sort of helped repair animatronic heads and also operate them for live shows. And this was when I was quite young. So yeah, I got to work in the UK a number of times and travel with this big kids show, and also help out on the TV version of it for the BBC. And then after that, I got into concert lighting. Having spent so much time in the live world, I went into live events. So I did lots of weird and wonderful things. I had the fortunate opportunity to be the lighting designer for the Moscow Circus in South Africa and Taiwan. I got to travel to New Zealand to launch YouTube in New Zealand when that happened. I got to work with so many amazing artists, especially music artists. So yeah, I sort of worked in that live event world, mainly in lighting design and sort of production management. And then I think it was when I did the launch of a casino, a big sort of launch in South Africa. And that was the moment, like, it was just everything went wrong. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I decided then, screw it, I'm going to go to film school. Like, I'd always loved making movies as a kid. And after I finished high school, I actually applied to go to film school and got in, but just didn't accept it because I went into live events. But I decided then and there I'll quit my job and I'm going to go to film school with the intention of only doing it for a year. But ended up doing the full 3 years and got stuck in the world of film and TV ever since. So I worked as a post-production supervisor at a post-production place called The Butchery in Melbourne that did sort of all big budget television commercials and the occasional sort of feature film, that sort of thing. And their sister company, The Refinery, which had Autodesk's Flame and Smoke suites and Resolve for color and that sort of thing. So I was sort of in that high-end post-production world, whilst at the same time running my own company with my business partner, Nick Collar, Late Night Films. And we have been doing that ever since. So I think we've been in this office for almost a decade now. And we do lots of weird and wonderful projects, from animation to TV shows. All kinds of weird and wonderful things. And as part of that, we, in the last however many years, we've been using Final Cut pretty much exclusively for all our jobs. And by using Final Cut, there was lots of things that I always wanted to fix. And one day, I think it was Scott Simmons said on Facebook, he got really frustrated when working on massive Final Cut libraries that he couldn't find the playhead when he's scrolling through in thumbnail view. So I was like, oh, surely that's an easy thing to fix. So I basically made this very simple program that allowed you to sort of highlight where the playhead is in the browser and when you're sort of skimming through all the effects. And that turned out to be very popular. More people asked for things. And then I created something called FCP Hacks, which was just a bunch of sort of like feature requests from users to fix Final Cut weirdness. And that grew into Command Post, and now Command Post has been downloaded a crazy amount. I can't remember how much, like over 100,000 times, and is used basically to speed up things in Final Cut. So it has it's got too many features that even I don't know what it does now.
Yeah, it's a very fully featured thing, and it's funny because Steve and I were talking. I kind of stayed away from it for a while because I work in so many different environments, and I thought somehow it would make Final Cut not work the same. But I recently got that Monogram, control surface, and it needed Command Post, so I installed it, and I was like, "Why have I not done this before?" Because it gives you so many other options and so many interesting things and access to so many little, not necessarily fixes, but enhancements to Final Cut that it's a great thing.
So, yeah, and it's sort of grown so complicated. Like I said, there's so much stuff that even I've forgotten half of the things it does, because whenever we got feature requests, we just sort of added it, and it's sort of grown. And a lot of interesting thing about like Monogram and Loop Deck and that sort of thing, they were also very hesitant at the start to force their users to install Command Post because for obvious reasons. And so they tried to do Final Cut Pro support themselves, realize how hard it is, and then it will eventually come back and go, actually, we're just going to use Command Post for this. So yeah, Monogram, Tangent, Loop Deck, they now all officially use Command Post as their Final Cut Pro integration.
Hey, I just want to give a reminder to folks out there, if you're just joining us, we're with Chris Hocking, who's the inventor of the BRAW Toolbox that allows you to use BRAW footage shot with Blackmagic cameras in Final Cut Pro, which he's going to demo in a moment here. I just want to let you know, we're here to answer your questions, and Chris especially, about this plugin. So he's going to do a demo, but please post your questions, and we'll do as good a job as we can to bring them up and answer them. So I just want to point that out. And if you do want to support the show, we don't have any sponsors. We're just Ripple Training, and we do the show in order to build our audience and to do something for the community here. But if you want to do a super chat, you can click on the button in the chat there and contribute a nominal amount, and your question kind of gets highlighted up there. But just want to let you know you guys can answer questions. But Chris, given that background, why don't you tell us a little bit now about BRAW Toolbox? First of all, it's live like now on the App Store,
today.
Right?
Came out today.
Yeah, came out today.
Yeah, so it actually came out in my yesterday, but yeah, your today. So yeah, it came out 9 a.m. or around 9 a.m. on Monday morning, Melbourne time. So it's been out for a little while, but it's been in a public beta since end of December. So
I'm just going to bring up a quick screen to show. Here it is on my screen, BRAW Toolbox. So, and this is in the U.S., and I believe it's half price. This $39.99 is half price for the first week. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So for all the early adopters, we're sort of giving a 50% discount to everyone who downloads it this week, and then end of this week it goes up to double the price.
Fantastic. Well, why don't you show us a little bit about what you can do here?
All right. So you want to jump onto my screen, or
There you go.
Yep. So basically, as I said, it's on the App Store, which is a pretty cool accomplishment in itself. It's my first app on the App Store, and I've just seen it's number 16 in the photo and video, which I've never seen at the actual chart for this, so that's pretty exciting. And we also have another app, which we'll talk a bit about, called Gyro Toolbox, that sort of came out at the same time as a sort of sister application. Very simple. I'm just going to open BRAW Toolbox. So I've already installed it from the App Store. And we'll get this sort of application. It's very simple. It basically allows you to install a motion template, a metadata view, and a set of LUTs. And this is all like the main application does. and then I'm just going to launch Final Cut, and we're into our normal Final Cut. So BRAW Toolbox works via a workflow extension. So you can find workflow extensions, either this little icon here. If you've got multiple workflow extensions installed, you'll get this sort of, jigsaw piece icon. If you've only got one workflow extension installed, for example, if you've only got Frame.io, you'll only have that Frame.io button. I've got a lot of extensions installed, so you can see I've got a big list here. So you get the thumbnail, the jigsaw puzzle, and we can see all my extensions, and you can see BRAW Toolbox here. You can also access it through the window extensions list. You can see all the same extensions here, and we can see BRAW Toolbox here. So I'm just going to click that. And the BRAW Toolbox workflow extension is essentially our import media window, the equivalent of the same as if you just go import media in Final Cut Pro. This allows you to import BRAW clips and manipulate all the metadata before you bring it into Final Cut. So this is sort of like your where you do all your prep work. So I'm just going to import some BRAW files. I'm just going to click here. I'm just going to drag in a bunch of clips from the Blackmagic website. You can also just drag and drop from Finder into this window. So it works sort of same as the import tool in Final Cut. And we can see here, I can easily click through all my clips. I can easily sort of scrub through, and you can see it's very performant. You sort of get, we're using, as you can see up here, we're using the Blackmagic RAW SDK. So this is using the same under the hood technology as DaVinci Resolve and the Blackmagic RAW player. So we can jump through here. We can see really good performance. I can play back. I can jump around. Down here, we have the start time code. Down here, we have the current time code, so we can sort of scrub through. And we basically can use this sort of browser, and it's sort of a similar sort of layout to Final Cut. So we've got our file list here, our player here, and our inspector up here. In the file view, we have a lot of extra metadata. So you can see here, we've got like a lens type and the crop size, that sort of thing. You can right click on these columns and turn things on and off, and obviously rearrange things as you would in Final Cut. So this is basically allows you to look through things. And here we've got our controls, our RAW controls. And these are exactly the same as in DaVinci Resolve or any other application. So what I might do is I'm just going to grab, we'll just have a look, maybe the surfing footage. What are we going to do? We'll just grab this first clip over the edge, and maybe we decide we want it to be a bit more, we'll bring down the exposure a bit. We might change the, we'll leave it on a Blackmagic Design gamut, but we're just going to change the gamut to custom. And when I change it to custom, you'll see that all our custom gamut controls are now enabled. So I'm just going to bump up the saturation.
Chris, can I interrupt you for just a second?
Of course.
For folks who aren't familiar with working with RAW, the big advantage of working with RAW is you basically have the raw camera data, and you're able to manipulate things like color, temperature, ISO, exposure in post that you wouldn't have access to once it's baked into a format in the camera. Just if you haven't actually worked with this before, because it's a huge thing to be able to do what you're doing right now.
Yeah, and I mean, those that come from a photography background, I'm not a photographer, but for those in that sort of world, like, and even on iPhones now, you can shoot raw photos on your iPhone. And the big power of that is just things like just being able to adjust the color temperature after the fact gives you a lot more freedom in post-production. And if you screw things up when you're setting up the camera and you want to make changes, the fact that you can manipulate all that metadata after the fact is really powerful. And even like Final Cut Pro obviously supports RED files, R3D files, and you can manipulate all the data. But if you create proxies or stuff like that, you have to recreate the proxies, because in Final Cut, once you create the proxies, it sort of bakes in that metadata. Whereas what we're doing here, every time we're adjusting something, BRAW Toolbox is reading the BRAW file directly, taking this metadata and processing it in real time. So there's nothing, we're not transcoding to ProRes, we're not baking anything in. All that metadata we can manipulate at any time. So you can see here there's lots of controls, and I'm not a cinematographer, I'm not a colorist, I'm not a color science guru. So a lot of the time, like for me as a dumb filmmaker, I'm not going to go in and adjust like the highlight roll off and understand all the science behind this. I'm probably just going to go, I want it to be in, I want to edit in sort of like log footage, the same as I'm getting off an Alexa. So I'm probably just going to change it to like Blackmagic Design film. And that's probably all I'm going to do. And then I'm going to do any color correction using the color board and curves and stuff within Final Cut. But for the purposes of this demo, I'll change it to custom. I'll bump up that saturation. And you've got a lot of controls down here. So one thing that might be a little unintuitive is that these checkboxes down the side here, these are basically like selection checkboxes. So for example, all the buttons down the bottom here rely on these checkboxes. So for example, I've manipulated the color temp. Maybe I want to reset that. I can just click this checkbox, which shows I've selected the color temp, and then I'm going to reset that checked item. Oh, no, maybe not. Oh, maybe it's because I didn't adjust the thing. I'll just adjust the exposure here. Let's make it really bright, and then I'll reset this one. No, that's not working. Live demos. I'm not sure why that doesn't work, but you should be able to check these things and reset. Oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong button. It's a user error, not a software error.
Yeah,
I don't want to reset checked item. Reset selected clip. But basically, these are all selection things, so I can save presets and restore presets. So for example, I might want a preset that always has that custom with a very custom look, so I can define that and apply that to all my clips in here. Or for example, maybe you did something wrong when you were filming and you used the wrong LUT or something like that. You could basically save presets and apply it to all the clips in here. So basically the workflow extension is where you predefine everything before you bring it into Final Cut. The other things worth mentioning is by default, we use a decode quality of automatic HD. And this is something a bit different than any other application. Generally speaking, in Resolve or Premiere, that sort of thing, you basically just have full, half, quarter, or eighth. We've got these two unique options where HD and Ultra HD, we basically use the Blackmagic RAW SDK to tell us what like our output size is. So if we're working in a HD timeline with 12K clips, the API will tell us which decode quality is the best option based on that settings. Because there's no point if you're working with 12K footage in a HD timeline, you might not need to render it full decode quality because it's a lot more processor intensive, but the end result doesn't really matter. So generally speaking, we just leave it on automatic HD because most of the time for our deliverables, we're delivering HD anyway. You can also do Ultra HD. And you can also set this up as a default in this little settings, the little jog wheel icon. No, not jog wheel, cog wheel.
Gear.
Gear, yep. There's default decode quality here, so we can change that. And then once I change this, everything I import after the fact will change that decode quality. But it's also important to note that this is raw footage. So we can change our decode quality at any point, and I'll show that in a second. So generally speaking, I'm just going to bring everything as Ultra Automatic HD, and that basically just means that BRAW Toolbox will decide itself whether to go full, half, quarter, or eighth quality. And then the way BRAW Toolbox works under the hood is to just keep things simple and performant and easy, we import the BRAW footage, the visuals directly. So we're always looking at the BRAW files directly. But for audio, we just rip out the audio from the BRAW files and make them separate clips, just normal WAV files, just to keep things simple. So that's why you have this choose audio folder button. So I'm just going to click that, and I'm just going to save all my audio to a folder here. And then once I'm ready to bring all these clips into Final Cut, I click the Prepare BRAW files. And what's that's doing behind the scenes is just creating all the WAV files and creating a Final Cut Pro XML. And now it says it's successfully processed, and we can turn off this message again once we know how it all sort of works. And basically, I drag this little green icon, and you can see once I drag it, it turns into a library icon. And I'm going to drag that to my library. And now we've got all our BRAW files in here. And we can see here as we scroll through, like it's very performant, very fast. Everything's working really nicely. I'm going to grab, you can see here, this clip has my amazing color grade where I've made it super saturated. And everything's come in as synchronized clips. So it's worth noting at this point that if you're working, say for instance, with all your B-roll footage, one option you can do is in here, we can change it to create multicam clips instead. And the benefit of that is obviously with synchronized clips, they're all their own sort of instance. So if I drag a synchronized clip into my timeline, it is its own instance of that clip. So if I adjust the color within the synchronized clip in the timeline, it won't affect the browser. Whereas multicam clips are sort of like a new master clip. So if I create multicam clips instead, I can adjust the color within the browser, and that will also ripple through to all the clips on the timeline as well. The benefit of keeping them synchronized clips is that you can, if you're shooting with dual system sound, so maybe you've got 2 cameras and a sound devices recorder, you can use your normal timecode sync workflow and send the synchronized clips along with the sound devices audio to something like Intelligent Async Sync and Link, and sync all your timecode the way that we always do in Final Cut Pro. So now we've got our clips here, and we'll have a quick look at what's actually happening behind the scenes. So if I just double click one of these BRAW clips, I'm just going to use the one that I manipulated the data on. We can see here what's happening. We've got our normal audio. So as I said, if I reveal this in Finder, our audio is now just a regular WAV file. You can see here, plays in Finder, just a regular WAV file. So audio, very simple. We just drag out the WAV audio from the BRAW file. But our video clip here, you can see we don't see any thumbnails here, even though it's updating in the viewer. And the reason for that is that this black clip is actually just a dumb custom solid. So if I grab this custom solid, we drag it here, we can see that they're basically exactly the same thing. And we can see this because I can see the published parameters here. If I change this to, let's just go a red, we can see here the thumbnail's updated. So this is actually just a dumb generator. And the annoying thing about generators is that for whatever reason, they don't update their thumbnails. So even though we can see in the viewer that this is actually BRAW footage, our thumbnail doesn't show, like the generator isn't smart enough to show the correct thumbnails in the timeline. But that doesn't matter for what we're doing. Now, where the magic's really happening is that we've actually got just a normal Final Cut effect. And if we scroll into our effects browser, we can see under, where are we? Where's BRAW? We can see, there we are, BRAW Toolbox. We can see it's just a regular effect here. And the workflow extension adds this and does all the magic to make this happen. But basically, we're essentially applying an effect to a generator, and that gives us our BRAW files. So if I show parameters here, we can now see all the parameters that we saw in our workflow extension. So we can see here, that's where I adjust the exposure and the saturation. And the awesome thing about this is, now that I can access it in the Final Cut Inspector, I can do things like keyframing. So for example, with my saturation, I'm just going to create a keyframe here. And then as they come down, I'm going to pull that saturation right down. And we can see in real time, all working really nicely on, what is this? Oh, this is only 2K footage, or 2864. But you can see it's working really nicely and it's keyframing, and we can do the same with any of the frame metadata. So if we want to keyframe the exposure as well, we'll put a keyframe here and another keyframe here, and we'll just bring this down. And you can see in the inspector, everything's updating really nicely. Performance is really good. And we basically have full BRAW controls of our footage. And then if we jump back into our browser, we can see here, it's all working as we'd expect in the browser. And I'm just going to open up a timeline. I'll just throw that footage at the end. And then we have our BRAW footage playing really nicely with our nice keyframes as well, with our keyframed bringing down the saturation. Now, going back to, I'll just double click on this now to go into our, that being weird, go into our synchronized clip again. What I was saying before about the decode quality is that, like all these other metadata controls, I can adjust the decode quality after a fact. So I force it to full quality, I can force it to 8th quality. And one really cool thing about BRAW Toolbox is that you can just work in automatic HD, and then when it comes time to exporting, what I can do is I can click this global settings button, and this allows you to apply changes to every single BRAW Toolbox clip in your library. So I can force everything to 8th quality, and now when I play back, you can see the quality. Hopefully you can see it on the live stream, but you can see the quality is a lot worse because now every single clip, regardless of what I've got set here, is now forced to 8th decode quality. So it's sort of like a master override, which is really helpful if you want to work on an older laptop. You want to work at this is basically like the equivalent of working with proxies. And then when you come to doing your full render, you can render at full quality and everything comes out at the best quality of the BRAW footage. So you get this sort of full control. So yeah, that's basically, and then essentially once you've got everything in, it's basically just like working with normal footage. It just appears as normal sync clips. So for most users, you're not ever going to really need to jump in and adjust this metadata, assuming you shot everything correct in camera. A lot of the time, you don't need to access all this stuff because you can grade as you normally would. So if I just jump back into my timeline, and now I will grab the exposure. You can see here, I'm just now manipulating with the normal color wheel controls, color board controls within Final Cut. So I can just treat it as a normal clip. It is worth noting also that we spent a lot of time working with some very smart people, Mark and Jamie, to make sure that this works with HDR workflows as well. And again, I'm not a colorist, I'm not a color science guru, so I needed help from actual really smart colorists to make all this work. But if we go back into our BRAW Toolbox, I'll just bring in some of these clips again. What we have down here is we can actually adjust the color space. So we've got our standard Rec 709, which is what I've been working on, but we also have the same options as you'd find in Final Cut itself. So we've got like the wide gamut Rex 2020, the Rex 2020 PQ, HDR, and HLG. And when we change these settings, you can see it adjusts in our workflow extension player as well. So if we go to Rex 2020 PQ, you can see it looks a bit weird here because we're applying a film gamma on a Rex 2020 PQ setting. You'll also note there's a little grayed out thing here. We've got a secret apply LUT after import. And this is where like the real magic lies in terms of if you're doing hardcore HDR grading in Final Cut Pro, and maybe you're just doing a really solid offline edit and then sending it to DaVinci Resolve to do your final feature film or whatever. We worked really closely with Mark and Jamie to come up with a way to use the DaVinci wide gamut intermediate gamut or gamma. So if I change this to Blackmagic Design and I change it to the DaVinci intermediate, basically, is that right? No, I want the DaVinci wide gamut and DaVinci intermediate. Once I do that, I have the option to turn on this LUT. And you won't actually see anything happen in the player here. But if I bring this into Final Cut, it'll apply a special LUT on top of the raw parameters that matches exactly the same color science and same color processing as you see in DaVinci Resolve. So if you're grading DaVinci Resolve in a wide gamut DaVinci intermediate gamma, the results you see on a HDR monitor will match between Final Cut Pro and DaVinci Resolve perfectly. So that's sort of the way that we recommend if you're going to be working in HDR. I would recommend a PQ Final Cut Pro library and project, and you make use of this DaVinci wide gamut intermediate settings, and then everything will look great in both Final Cut and DaVinci Resolve.
Excellent. Thank you for that. That's excellent. Hey, we do have a couple of questions here. And for some reason, my mouse is stuck in my iPad display and will not come out of it. So I can't click on the questions, but I will turn off the iPad to see if that gives it back to me. Yes, it did. So I want to bring up Peter Boyko, who asked, can I bring in BRAW into Final Cut, apply various plugin effects from Motion Effects, such as MSpy or anything really, and bring the clips back into Resolve for color grading?
Yes. Well, I mean, so basically once the clips are in Final Cut, they're essentially normal clips. So I don't know what Motion VFX plugins. Let's have a look, see what I've got here.
Yeah, it shouldn't matter what the effect. I guess the question in a broader sense is, can I apply effects to clips and then grade in Resolve? Although I don't know why you'd want to grade on top of an effect.
No. So basically, well, there's two parts to that. So as you can see here, I've just dragged in a M-Flare 2 effect, and you can see here it's working fine in Final Cut Pro. So yes, effects, you can apply whatever effects you want to the synchronized clip or the multicam clip. Maybe let me turn that one off. I'll put in something else. What else have we got? Movie lights, dragging some movie lights. See here, even with that effect on, it's still very performant, and it works just the same as a normal clip. So in terms of bringing clip effects into Final Cut, yes, you can do whatever you do normally. In terms of bringing things into DaVinci Resolve, that's a really good point. So what we'll do is, I'll just duplicate this timeline. I'll just call this Resolve timeline. I'll just correct that because I like things to be right. So maybe let's bring in some of this watch footage, and we'll bring in some of this boxer, and we'll bring in some of our surfing stuff. There we go. So the way, you can't just go file, export XML and send it to DaVinci Resolve. And the reason for that is that obviously Resolve doesn't like working with synchronized clips with effects on it. So that just sort of doesn't work. But we do have a solution for that. So if we go into our BRAW Toolbox effect, at the bottom here, within our toolbox, we have more toolboxes. So we have another toolbox down here with a bunch of different options. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert project to Resolve-friendly Final Cut Pro XML. Now, it's worth noting, I thought this was obvious, but maybe it's not, that all of these options, the reason that I've capitalized event is that relink BRAW clips within an event means that you have to drag in an event. When I say convert project to Resolve-friendly Final Cut Pro XML, you need to drag in a project. So the name sort of defines what you need to drag in. So I'm going to convert project to Resolve-friendly Final Cut Pro XML. And what I will do is I'll grab my Resolve timeline. I'm dragging the project into this little drop zone area. And if all goes to plan, we'll see how a live demo goes. I'm just going to call this Resolve. And we've created a new Final Cut Pro XML that Resolve can read. So and again, I haven't, we're just going on the fly here, so we'll see how this goes. It should work.
Taking a chance.
Assuming DaVinci Resolve opens, we will be able to test this workflow. And all we basically did was we replaced our BRAW Toolbox clips with .braw files. And obviously, if you have a Final Cut Pro XML with .braw files, if you try to bring that into Final Cut, well, we can try it. Let's give it a go. If I import our XML, and I've just got our Resolve one, you'll see the XML cannot be imported because basically an error, inappropriate file type or format. And the reason for that is we're trying to bring in BRAW files, .BRAW, and Final Cut just doesn't know how to deal with that, unfortunately. So I'm just going to bring in a new project, and I'm just going to import our timeline. We'll grab that resolve one, and if everything works fine, I'm just going to assume that all the defaults are good. We can see here, come on, DaVinci Resolve. There we go. Nice. So everything's brought across. This is working. Let me go into timeline view. You can see here up in the inspector, it's a .BRAW file, so we've relinked the actual BRAW files, and everything matches what we had in Final Cut Pro. So yes, you can definitely go from Final Cut Pro to DaVinci Resolve, and as I said, if you're working in a HDR workflow, everything works really nicely with that. The same disclaimers apply. We're not doing anything special with the Final Cut Pro XML. We're literally just swapping out our BRAW Toolbox clips with actual BRAW clips. So the same disclaimers apply, like in terms of effects and stuff. It will work the same way as you're sending ProRes files from Final Cut to Resolve. It won't do anything
in terms of
special.
Peter's question, those if you're applying effects in Final Cut and going to Resolve, you're not going to see those effects in Resolve.
No, yeah, and I want to comment on that for a moment, because it's just there's two approaches to using your tool. When I've been playing with it over the weekend, and by the way, just amazing job you did, Chris. The fact that I can bring in my Blackmagic Pocket 6K cameras right into Final Cut and not to have to launder them through Resolve is just fantastic. And just the way you've implemented it. Yeah, you're using like little tricks with dummy generators, but I don't care. At the end of the day, I'm able to edit with BRAW right in the timeline with really good performance. But the reason I want to talk about workflow, because I see like two different camps of people using it. For me, I'm one type of user that just wants to bring it all into Final Cut and just finish everything in Final Cut. But there are other types of users that no, they just want to do a rough cut because they plan on doing complete finishing and Resolve. They're not planning on doing any sort of color work at all in Final Cut. They just want to get a kind of a normalized look so it looks good on their screen, and then send it over to their colorist. So I just, I see again, two camps of people that might be using this tool. I fall into the camp that says I want to finish in Final Cut. So it's just really interesting that this tool now exists where I have this choice of where I actually want to finish my project, which is really huge. As a Final Cut user. And I mean, to me, you've solved the bottleneck. I can't tell you how many shows Mark and I have fielded this one question, like, when is BRAW going to be supported in Final Cut? It is now with your plugin, and it's just fantastic.
Yeah, and I guess that's the reason. So basically, when Blackmagic RAW first came out, however many years ago it was, the first thing, when they came out with an open SDK, the first thing I did was like, I need to put this into Final Cut. And I tried it, I got it sort of working. I think this was before the BRAW SDK supported metal and stuff like that. So I was just using the CPU, and it worked. It was sort of slow, and I could only do it to a generator. And I was like, no one's going to want it. Like, what's the point of having a generator? That doesn't make any sense at all. So it's taken me a few years to actually get my head around, wait a second, if I use a workflow extension, it doesn't matter that it's a generator, because I can just automate that all and it will just work. So I've been thinking about this for years, and the only reason that we really need it, like for us, I'm shooting on a Blackmagic camera right now. We have Blackmagic Ursas and stuff in the office, but we just shoot ProRes, and we've always shot ProRes, and we'll probably continue to shoot ProRes, so it doesn't really matter. But the reason that I built this is because there are times where random clients will come in with 2 terabytes, 4 terabytes, 8 terabytes of BRAW files. And whilst I can use the amazing Color Finale transcoder or Edit Ready to convert it all to ProRes and edit with that in Final Cut, it takes half a day to convert 2 terabytes of BRAW files, and then I need another 4 terabytes of storage space. And for a 30-second corporate video or television commercial, I don't really want to waste terabytes, especially as where data, I have a problem where we keep every single job, and I'll keep render files and stuff like that, so that if a job comes back, I can just easily restore the whole thing from LTO tape and not have to re-render or do anything. So that means for those jobs, because I'm crazy, I will keep all the BRAW files and the ProRes files. So suddenly my 2-day edit for a 30-second television commercial now requires 30 LTOs to archive at the end of the day and doesn't make any sense to do in financial terms. So that's really the use case for us. I don't think this, if you're doing Hollywood feature films or television shows, you're probably still going to edit off proxies. There's going to be a daily system. You're just going to get sent stuff like that. So I don't think this replaces a lot of workflows. But for those people that are like me, that 90% of the time we're not working with BRAW files, like 90% of our jobs are shot on Alexas or an RE camera in ProRes. So most of the time we're just editing ProRes. For our own jobs, we'll continue to shoot ProRes on our Blackmagic cameras. But for those times where I need to bring in BRAW stuff quickly, this is where I'll use BRAW Toolbox. And I could use DaVinci Resolve, but I use Final Cut for everything. And I am so much slower from like a creative thinking point of view doing it in Resolve, just because I've got so many hours. I've got so many hours in Final Cut. I basically drive it like a musical instrument.
It's so funny. I feel exactly the same way. And I'm a great use case for this because I have a team I work with on certain shoots, and they shoot with Blackmagic cameras, Blackmagic 6K Pocket and a 12K Ursa. And before this plugin came out last year, when we did a shoot together, I had them give me ProRes. And no, I hadn't given ProRes, but I just did the edit in Resolve because it was a fairly simple edit. There was no audio involved. It's like, I'll use Resolve for color grading if I really need to really tweak the color, but I don't generally use it for editing very much. But I just did that time. But now I literally had a shoot on Friday, and I want to get to answer this question here that Valerie posted, saying, you must work with Resolve, or can you just use this in Final Cut too? Well, you can absolutely just use it in Final Cut. And I just want to share this because here's my screen. So I did a shoot on Friday, like I say, with two Blackmagic cameras in BRAW. They also gave me 1080p ProRes as a backup in case things didn't go well, but they gave me the full BRAW. And you can see I've got two BRAW events right here. This camera A, you can see I've got 247 clips, and camera B, I've got 209 clips over there of all BRAW. And I put all of this stuff into BRAW Toolbox. And what was great about this is, I was transferring data during the shoot because I had to deliver a same day edit. And that was in ProRes, but I was going around and grabbing their cards while they were shooting and swapping cards and downloading. But then they gave me the ProRes at the end of the day, the BRAW at the end of the day, and I just threw it in here, and it just works. The only problem I ran into, and that we were troubleshooting earlier, there seems to be with Ventura 13.2, I've seen this posted in other forums too, an issue with large amount of clips. So when I took the first batch of 247 clips worked perfectly. The second batch of 209 clips kind of choked on it, so I broke it into batches. I did 100, it worked, and then I did 250s, and it worked. And I was able to bring it all in. But this is all the B-roll, and I can sit here and just play it back, in real time, and it's just freaking fantastic. And by the way, you notice, when I brought this in, it already had a LUT applied, which you didn't really talk about. I'm sorry, I'm just looking for a 3-up display there. So because my team uses a custom LUT for this, so it was already embedded, and you can choose whether or not to include that when you bring it in. And for a quick turnaround, I'll bring it in because it's already really close to what I want to do. And you can always turn it off the LUT on a clip-by-clip basis if you want to grade, essentially in log. You can do those raw adjustments, but then you can essentially grade a log encoded clip at that point. So I love this thing. It's really great.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but BRAW, they Blackmagic writes a lot of that LUT metadata into the file header, correct?
Well, if you just give me screen for a second.
There you go.
If we just jump back into, we'll bring some stuff in. So we've got, I'll just turn it back to Rec 709. So you can see here, there's a LUT source, and let me just scroll through and see if there's any LUTs. Maybe this one's a LUT. So there's a LUT source option here, and on this clip it's disabled, but you have the option of embedded and sidecar. And embedded, basically, if there is a LUT recorded when you were if you set a LUT when you were recording on the camera, you can restore that embedded LUT. And you can see here, this one actually does. It's got an embedded LUT here. So we can, obviously the DOP or the camera operator had a LUT loaded, but didn't actually have it enabled when they recorded. So I can access that embedded LUT right here, which is really handy to see what like the DOP was thinking. Because a lot of the time they'll use a LUT to sort of check that it looks right, and then actually like go back to just log to view it. But you can also use a sidecar, and at the moment, I don't think, if I just go with disabled, yeah, there's no sidecar file. But basically the way BRAW works is that, let me just have a look and see, do any of these have sidecar files? No. But basically, let me have a look in here. Here's one with a sidecar file. So a sidecar file is basically just a JSON file with a bunch of metadata. So this is just one that came straight off a camera. You can see here it's got the tone curve information and the gamma LUTs and exposure and that sort of thing. So you can actually, if a LUT is recorded in this sidecar file, you can get BRAW Toolbox to render that. And this is really interesting because what you could do is that you shoot everything, you give it to someone on DaVinci Resolve, they not grade it, but they adjust all the gamma controls to make it all look correct, save that as sidecar files, and sidecar files are really just text files, so they're very small. You can email that to the editor, they just have to put it in the same folder as the BRAW files, and now all that metadata comes through. So you could basically get a colorist to do a sort of pre-look setup sort of thing, send those sidecar files to the editor, and now all that metadata flows through to Final Cut Pro. And then if you're just doing the offline edit, everything matches the DOPs and the colorist's intentions. You send that over to DaVinci Resolve, the sidecar files come through and everything looks consistent. So you get this really sort of professional workflow that was one of the big benefits of Red R3D files when they first came out, with this, all the, I've forgotten what they're called now, whatever the Red sidecar filer is. But the benefit of this is that with Red stuff, even if you're working with really big 12K files or whatever, Final Cut Pro can still struggle. So a lot of the time you can import Red natively, but you'll create proxies or optimize media anyway. Whereas with BRAW Toolbox, we don't really need to do that because we can adjust the decode quality to process really, really fast. And then when it comes to doing our final exports, we can up that decode quality to full and we get the full quality of the file. And also sidecar files can also include LUTs. So you can get quite detailed color grading stuff within that sidecar file. So you can get a colorist to really sort of, define what that thing looks like, and it all just flows through across your whole post-production pipeline. So that's pretty cool.
Awesome. I do want to get to a couple people's questions and comments. Actually, James mentions that besides the Blackmagic cameras, these other cameras can record via video assist to BRAW, or as you say, BRAW. I've always said BRAW. I don't know what the right way to say it is, but the Canon 300, Fuji, Leica, Panasonic, EVA1, the GH5S. That's interesting. And then he adds on to that. Sorry, I know that went away, but also the Sigma, the Z-Cam. A lot of cameras can shoot Blackmagic, so there's a wide universe available there.
I guess they're sort of competing with Atomos in that Blackmagic recorders now it's such an open format, and that's the great benefit about Blackmagic. I didn't need their permission to do this. I just downloaded the RAW SDK and spent enough time smashing the keyboard until things worked. And on the flip side, they're also really bloody helpful, and they're in Melbourne, so the same time zone as me. So nice. I can, their technical support was astonishingly good. I've worked with lots of other people with command posts, and you never get to speak to the people that really know what they're doing. Whereas Blackmagic, I send them questions. It's like, I've never worked with metal before. I don't really understand it, but I'm doing this. Give me a thing. And they'll come back with an instant reply with technical code examples and stuff that I just go what? So their technical support is just incredible. So they're really, really good to work with.
Well, speaking to the source, I just want to remind people, this is a chance to ask Chris, the developer of this tool, directly and ask him anything you want. So just feel free to post a question in there. And I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Oh, there was a question earlier that let's see, Shoji Productions asked. It's a beginner question, maybe off topic. Can you talk a little bit about BRAW versus ProRes RAW? What other cameras besides Blackmagic?
Yeah, I'll bring that up here just so folks can see it there.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, as Jamie or James, I think he refers to on this thing, I only know him via his screenshot, so it's all weird meeting people. I don't think we've ever met in person. But yeah, there's lots of cameras that you can use a Blackmagic Video Assist to record BRAW. And I guess now the benefit of BRAW is that it works in Final Cut and Resolve, whereas ProRes RAW doesn't work across both of them. So I think it really depends on your workflow.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I found ProRes RAW. Sorry, you go.
No, I was saying I find that ProRes RAW is great, but it's so limiting in terms of the controls, and most of the camera manufacturers don't even unlock the ability to adjust color balance, which is primarily what I use RAW for, is to get the color balance right. So that's one of the I think the disappointing things about ProRes RAW is that so few camera manufacturers actually sport the full gamut, as you will, of controls for their cameras.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm assuming you can't keyframe any of that metadata because it's not in the,
I don't think so.
So yeah, that's where one thing that we've been able to do something unique is that you can keyframe all the frame metadata and all the custom gamma controls, and it just magically works, which, I mean, in the real world sense, you're probably never going to do that, except if you're doing like whenever someone gets a new camera, they do that classic test of going from outside to inside to show the dynamic range of the camera. Then this is really helpful because now you can just pull that metadata, do a nice keyframe, and it'll all sort of work.
It's great.
There's a question from Richard Davis here that's asked if we think Apple may build in BRAW support for Final Cut Pro. So before, anytime anybody asks, do you think that Apple will anything, it doesn't matter. There's no answer to that question.
Well, I'm gonna give my opinionated.
Yeah, please do.
My personal opinion is that yes, it will definitely come eventually. I think with a lot of things like Apple, it just takes 5 times longer than you think. Like dupe detection is a great example. Like everyone was screaming for that for years, and everyone's like, oh, it's never going to come because it's a pro feature. Apple doesn't care about pros. And then it eventually came. It took way longer than we thought it would, but it eventually came. I think BRAW's the same. My conspiracy theory, or my theory, is that the reason we don't have it is simply for what we just said. ProRes RAW, you can't even keyframe stuff. I just don't think they built the interface to do it. My prediction is that eventually we'll see a raw color inspector, and you'll be able to access the red metadata. Because at the moment, the button to access red metadata feels just like something they're like, we need to add red support. Quick, throw in a button and we'll just pop up something else. Whereas I think everything with Apple, they want it to be consistent and beautiful and all work nicely. I think eventually we'll see there'll be a color tab for raw properties, and you'll be able to manipulate ProRes metadata, BRAW metadata, RE RAW metadata all through the inspector. It'll all be keyframeable. I just don't think they've built it yet. And having gone through the chaos of just trying to get HDR stuff to work nicely, consistently between Resolve and Final Cut, I think all this stuff's just really hard. And I know I'm just an idiot in Melbourne doing it, and Apple's got more money than most small countries, but it's still just really tricky problems to solve, and changing one thing might break 7 million different things in their plugin system and all that kind of stuff. So I think we'll see it eventually. Who knows when. But yeah, I don't think there's any reason that Blackmagic wouldn't want to do it. Oh, well, sorry, that Apple wouldn't want to do it. And Blackmagic have said they really want BRAW support in Final Cut. They just haven't been able to because they don't have access to the things.
Here's a simpler question. Does BRAW Toolbox require Ventura?
No, I'm on Monterey. It requires Big Sur or greater. I would stay on Monterey because Ventura seems to have lots of issues. But yeah, we're all in Monterey in this office, and I know we've had quite a few people have tested in the last day on Big Sur, and it all seems to work.
And I would say if you're on Ventura, stay on 13.1.
Yeah, 13.2 seems to have an issue, and it's not a Final Cut issue, but from what I've seen from the crash logs, there's some change in AppKit that is breaking any complicated program like Final Cut. I think Logic might have already pushed out a fix and just not put it in the release notes. But I think any really complicated app that's dealing with lots of things, that just sort of breaks on Ventura, the latest version. And I know Apple's aware of it, and I'm sure they'll come out with a fix. But it might be a macOS thing rather than a Final Cut thing.
Here's a great question that Rakesh is asking about where to get support. And maybe you could talk a little bit to, like, I've seen you, because we've been testing this live, coming up with new support documents that address, because I was confused about LUTs. So you made a whole document about LUTs. Maybe you can just address what you have available now and how people get support.
Yeah, so everything's on BRAWtoolbox.io. And because I come from that open source background of command posts where we get a billion questions a day, that sort of thing, I try to keep everything very open. So all our documentation for BRAW Toolbox and Gyro Toolbox is all on a GitHub repo. So you can post issues. There's a discussion section. So I've tried to, even though this is a commercial product in that I'm selling it on the App Store, I've tried to keep that sort of open source community thing happening, that if people are having issues, it's not closed behind the door. It's all on the GitHub repo. So you can see this one poor user that we've never been able to get it to work on his trash can Mac Pro. And it works on every other trash can Mac Pro that we've been able to find. But there's one thing, and I think it's just because my assumption is that those old trash cans just are notorious for burning out their GPU. So I think he's just got faulty hardware. And once BRAW Toolbox is really going to it, it just every now and again he gets green frames. So I think that's a hardware thing. But basically, BRAWtoolbox.io has all the information you need. If there's stuff that I haven't mentioned, basically anytime someone asks a question, I'll update that documentation so that I don't have to answer the question again, or I have a link to post to so that people can answer. But yeah.
Awesome. Can I show something really quick?
Yeah, of course.
I have a question for Chris. This is a question for him. So if you just go to my screen for a second there, Mark. I just want to show something that
There you go.
All right. So I noticed when you showed the application of the metadata, you open the kind of the synchronized clip container in the browser, and that didn't occur to me because I put the clips right in the timeline. And normally before, you were able to just double click on the clip to get inside the synchronized clip, but now you got to go to clip, open clip. I just mapped a keyboard shortcut so I can move the play it over the BRAW clip and then press 0, and then it just opens up the clip container. But it sounds like I could do this in the browser, and then everything will kind of stay the same. There'll be parity from when you move the clip from the browser to the timeline. Is that correct? Is that what you were doing?
If you did it as a multicam, you could.
It's a multicam,
but you should be able to double click. Yeah, synchronized clips, you can just double click in the browser, in the timeline. They should open up.
Well, if you double click in the browser, they'll open up into the timeline. You don't have to use the open clip command.
You have to. You can double click. So I just double clicked on it. Yeah. So, but here's the other thing too is since the BRAW toolkit is applied at this generator level, and then I can hear all my controls. But this might be a good lead-in to talk about one of the reasons that I like my Blackmagic Pocket is it records the gyro data, and this might be a good point to talk about. I've got the GyroFlow toolbox. It's another $5. Well, this is a toolbox that you sell on your site that'll actually take the gyro data from the camera. Here, let me turn it off. I just thought this was one of the reasons why I went to Resolve is that I could take my camera and you could see how shaky it is there, right? It's pretty shaky. And then now I can apply your GyroFlow toolbox right within Final Cut. And now I got this really stable clip. I should mention that I have to use a third-party app to create the metadata for this. But the fact is I can now bring this GyroFlow data right into Final Cut and get stable clips. I just wanted to say that because that impressed the heck out of me too, that you got this, between your BRAW toolkit and this Gyro toolkit. I can pretty much stay right inside Final Cut for all my Blackmagic BRAW needs.
And just in case people don't know, I just wanted to show screen share. You can talk to this, Chris, but I just wanted to show that Gyro Toolbox is also now available on the App Store for $5. $5.
Oh, it has a 5 stars.
Well, that was mine. No, I don't
know. So yeah, basically, like one of the first questions when I announced I was doing this was, will you be able to stabilize like you can in DaVinci Resolve? And so I looked into it and went, oh God, stabilization is like maths and really complicated physics. I don't know if I'm going to be able to work this out. But luckily, some other geniuses have already done, excuse me, all the hard work. And there's an open source and free application called GyroFlow. And if you give me screen access,
there you go.
It's an incredible piece of software. It works with any camera or recorder that has gyro information metadata, and basically allows you to stabilize footage using gyro data. And it's actively maintained. The developer is an absolute genius. There's a DaVinci Resolve plugin that works incredibly well and gets better with each update. So rather than me recreate the wheel, I basically said, well, this is perfect. I need to make this work with Final Cut. So we came out with GyroFlow Toolbox, where it's in the App Store. Like I said, if you just find the BRAW Toolbox down the bottom, more tools by us, GyroFlow Toolbox. And the same deal, we open it and you need to install a motion template. And then I've just got a test clip. I've just got a, you can see here, I'll just turn off the audio in case that comes through. This is just a test clip from the GyroFlow website. And you can see here, it's crazy. Like it's clearly a test clip to check.
Can you play it in real time instead of scrubbing it just to see? Yeah.
This is, oh yeah. I don't know how it comes on the screen, but it might look jumpy on the screen, but it's really jumpy in real life too. They've just like thrown the camera around just to prove that the software works. So I'm just going to put this within a compound clip. And it's worth noting that this, you basically need to apply the GyroFlow Toolbox effect to an entire clip. So you really need to compound clip it first. That's just due to limitations with Apple's APIs. We don't get any information about the source clip. So we have to do this as sort of a workaround. So compound clip it, apply it to the whole clip. And then if you only need a section of clip, obviously you can just grab a section of the compound clip. And basically all you need to do is in GyroFlow, you can adjust all your stabilization metadata. You can do keyframes, there's lens correction, there's a billion features that you can sort of adjust things. And then you basically just, I don't know if I can do, let me drag in revealing Finder. Let me drag this into GyroFlow. So here's in GyroFlow, you can sort of see there's keyframes and all kinds of stuff. And I'm not a GyroFlow expert, so you can watch other tutorials to see how to make best use of this program. But basically, if you click the export, you can export project, including the process gyro data. And then you basically just import that project file into this Final Cut thing. So I've just imported this GyroFlow project file, and all that metadata's come across. And we can see here, if I go through, it's insane. You can see I've just adjusted the field of view so you can really see what's happening. But the stabilization is crazy, considering the source clip was just someone just throwing a camera around. And you can keyframe and adjust the field of view and the smoothness and the lens correction. What is that? Oh yeah, you can see it's doing something there. And there, as eventually in the next updates, we'll add some more parameters from GyroFlow to there. But yeah, basically it's taking and this is from a Sony A7S III, but it also works with BRAW Toolbox clips, obviously. It just is stabilizing the footage using the gyro data, and it works amazingly well. So yeah, very handy tool to have.
So it has to it works with cameras that are capturing that metadata of that gyro data. Right?
Correct. And there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
A lot of the
don't you also have to
Sonys.
shoot with stabilization turned off to get that?
I think it depends on the camera.
With A7S
So yeah,
III, I'm pretty sure you want to turn off your stabilization in order to have that gyro data
don't
be
have
accurate.
The Blackmagic cameras, at least my 6K doesn't have in-body camera stabilization at all. So
I think the Pocket, one of the Pockets does. Sorry, you're saying there's no you have to bring it into Resolve to stabilize. Yes,
yeah.
and DaVinci Resolve, like, I don't know if this is a well-known fact or not, but like DaVinci Resolve is not just using the gyro data; they're actually using their whole neural engine to do the stabilization. So there's like some seriously clever machine learning on top of the gyro data to make that all work. But GyroFlow also seems to do a pretty good job, and in some cases better than DaVinci Resolve, because they've spent so much time adding all crazy features to keyframe things and that sort of stuff.
I watched this video just because I'm interested in this whole gyro stabilization. I watched this very popular drone guy named Nurk, N-U-R-K, and he does a video. Maybe I'll post a link there. He does a video on this gyroscope because he does it with cinema cameras. What he did, and I was like fascinated, he took the GoPro camera, like 11, which does, records the gyro, and he mounted it to a cinema camera. Then he got the lens information for the cinema camera and then used the gyro data for the GoPro to apply it to the cinema camera. And it stabilized a camera that had had any gyro data at all. And I was like, dang, that's some tweaky stuff, but you could do it.
Yeah. They also make, I don't know if it's the same people, but there's another open source hardware project that has a little black box that records gyro data that also works with GyroFlow. So you can put that on an Alexa or a Red or whatever. But even like the Red Komodo, I think now has gyro enabled in the firmware. So if you're working on those seriously high-end stuff, you can use GyroFlow, bring it into Final Cut, use it as a Final Cut effect, and it just all magically works.
Fantastic.
So cool.
Well, these are just great products. I'm loving Command Post. GyroFlow is next on my list. I tried it quickly, but I used a clip that had image stabilization built in, so it wasn't happy with that, but I'm going to try that out. I do want to put up, I think this is a good mention from Scotty. He says, Chris, now that you've successfully released BRAW Toolbox, you should take a nice, long, well-deserved nap and maybe bake Stream Deck Plus support into Command Post if you're bored.
I've actually got my Stream Deck Plus right here.
All right.
And it's nearly working with Command Post, so yeah. Maybe
I just got one as well, so I'll use that. Get busy.
But yeah, one thing worth mentioning with the Stream Deck stuff is that currently Stream Deck supporting Command Post, we basically just talk to the hardware directly. And a lot of editors love that because all their settings are just in Command Post. So if they're moving between work and home, they just take their Command Post settings and everything just comes across. But one thing I do want to do, and I don't think it'll be a this week thing, but eventually I want to do like an official Stream Deck plugin so that you can use the official Stream Deck software to trigger Command Post actions the same way that we have a Loop Deck plugin. Nice. So that you have the freedom either to talk to the hardware directly or to use the official software, so that if you've already got, obviously a lot of people have like very good layouts from third parties for DaVinci Resolve or Photoshop, that sort of thing. Command Post is never really going to compete with that in terms of Photoshop or stuff like that. Like I really only care about Final Cut, maybe a little bit Resolve, maybe a tiny bit like Premiere. But I think having an official plugin will just make it easier to integrate Command Post in with existing Stream Deck workflows.
Well, it's great you mentioned that because we're both Stream Deck users, and especially with eCamm, we're using it to do all the switching we're doing here, all with eCamm. And just this, Mike Thomas asked at the beginning of the program, how do you guys like eCamm? So it's just a chance to give a shout out to eCamm because they've given us an opportunity to use this and test it out and try it out, and we're really loving it, especially when we combine it with the Stream Deck. So that's been made us be able to do these things in a more efficient way and be able to have folks like you on. So any final comments you want to make at all, Chris? Or
I do have a question about eCamm. Are you actually controlling this on a website or is it an app?
I'm controlling it with the app. And what's great about them is they have a very open beta program, and they have a Facebook page for both the beta and the shipping version. And they're extremely because we noticed a couple like, hey, maybe you could do this. And they're like, okay, it's in there now, like the next day. It's just great. So, we're digging the eCamm Live for sure. So
it's pretty amazing coming from like having done, like I've done a lot of TV and traditional broadcast, that sort of thing. One of the craziest jobs I ever did was I was sort of like the technical mediator when Major League Baseball came to Australia. So and I didn't realize how epic Major League Baseball is. So we had all the teams had their own TV stations, I guess. Each team had their own TV station essentially, and then you had like whoever the Major League Baseball TV station is. So I basically had all the American broadcasters in Australia all broadcasting simultaneously, and I had to mediate between all the Australians and the Americans and all the frame rate conversions and all that kind of stuff. But in that sort of live broadcast world, it's so insanely complicated, and the fact that you can just do this on a computer and create like pretty much broadcast quality live streaming stuff, we're in crazy times.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for being kind of the inaugural guest here on our new year and our new sort of push to do a lot more creator interviews. It's been great to have you here. Thank you for coming on right after getting this done. I think you do have a well-deserved rest ahead of you. I don't know if you're going to take it. But I just want to remind people, we're Ripple Training. We create training and plugins for Final Cut Pro and Motion and other related topics. And it's been great having you here, man. And we'll have to have you back.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. And,
I have to come up with some other crazy idea. And what other problems have you got?
There'll be plenty. I'm sure. All right, man. I think that's it. So very good to have you here, Chris. And
thank you.
We'll catch you soon. Okay. Nice to finally get to quote meet you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for all your questions.
All right. So, Steve, I think that seemed to go okay.
Did you close the show out?
Yeah, no, I didn't close it out. I just wanted to like wrap up where we started with the two of us. I just wanted to say thank people for joining.
Yeah. And, thank you guys for commenting and putting your comments in there. We're really excited about this new initiative of having other guest creators on and just talking about everything from editing to color correction, motion graphics, what have you. I love talking to other creative people, and Chris is definitely in a league of his own, man. Just how he figures this stuff out. He just stays up at night thinking about like how to solve problems, so it's really good.
It's pretty cool how this one individual is making these products, just a single person.
Yeah, exactly. So
what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say there was one question about, we're going to do training on something like this. I mean, I think Chris did a good job of giving a good overview, but if there's something that, you would like to see training wise, let us know. And Mark and I will consider all of those requests.
Yes. And you can get a hold of us here on Twitter or support@rippletraining.com. And we will see you guys soon when we do it again. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.